Hi everyone, thanks for coming today. Another full house, which is great to see. We've got an exciting panel today to talk to us about a very topical discussion around energy at the moment. So I'll let Rupert introduce them after. Rupert's going to be moderating. Before that, we'll have Mark Dunster from Grow here to talk us about progress and I suspect ask for some funds. I don't want no spoilers, but we know. And thanks to Islands for sponsoring these lunches today, which are just selling out all the time. It's great to see so many people here. Over to Mark.
Right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm here in my capacity as chairman of Grow. I've been told I've got 5 minutes, and you're all important commercial people who appreciate brevity, so here it is. 4 points. Firstly, who are we? Guernsey's Rural Occupational Workshop. More interestingly, if you've ever thought a friend, a relative, a neighbour has learning disabilities, well, what does life hold for them? The answer is now millions will be spent by the states of Guernsey for their education up till roughly around the age of 20. And then at that point, well, you finished education, please leave, there's nothing more for you, please come back aged 68 and you may or may not qualify for a pension, probably not because you haven't paid in. Our job is to try and fill that gap, to provide for people things which everyone in this room takes for granted. That is a reason to get up in the morning, something to do, skills to learn, companionship with your employers and your fellow workers, and a sense of pride in what you're doing. We've been doing that for about the last 40 years. And again, because you're commercial people, that is funded approximately 1/3 by the states, approximately 1/3 by the revenue we generate through the sale of principally plants, but also a small amount of woodworking like benches and bird boxes if you've been there, and 1/3 from a constant treadmill of speeches like this and the generosity of our fellow islanders. We are a purely Guernsey charity. Every penny that you give will be spent on the island and spent for the benefit of your fellow islanders. That's who we are. What are we doing right now? Well, we've been operating for about 40 years. During those 40 years, we've had the benefit of an old vinery site. That vinery site, like many around the island, has been gradually falling to bits. It reached a point where actually we had to repeatedly close because it was simply no longer safe to open because the glass wasn't secure. It wasn't safe in parts because we oughtn't to have asbestos-lagged anything. And in part, we were having to turn people away because they also had physical difficulties, which we just couldn't deal with. So we had to close, but we also wanted to close so we could do more. And what you're seeing here is our dream. And actually what you're seeing here is probably a lot more than a dream now, because if you've been past our site, it's been knocked down from what it was, and it is in the process of being rebuilt. When it is rebuilt, not only will we be able to help more people because we can stay open, we can help more people because we can deal with those with physical disabilities in addition, but we will be physically able to help more people. And we estimate that at the minute we're reaching perhaps 25% of those on the island who could do with our help. We hope to double that to 50% when we finish our redevelopment. So although we're being ambitious, you could see that even when we've done the redevelopment, there's plenty of headroom. That's what we're doing right now. Third point, what do we need right now? Well, as I've said, we rely principally on our own efforts and the generosity of the public. What the states of Guernsey emphatically don't do is give us any capital. We rely on our own efforts, and we have been running a redevelopment fundraising effort under the patronage and great help of Guy and Julia Hans, but also relying on the generosity of our fellow islanders. And I'm delighted to say, contrary to a lot of naysaying when we started, we're almost there. We've raised about 80% of the funds we needed, a little more, but for those of you good at maths, you'll see the problem. We are 20% short. We did think Shall we wait until we've raised every penny that we'll need before we start? But we were reluctant to do that because it's a building project of 18 months or more. And if we waited till we'd finished, actually, we wouldn't have even started now. And we'd be trying to start to build in a high inflation environment where you just can't get anyone to do anything. So right call there, but we're not there yet. So what we need is to finish. And what we need to finish is not goodwill and not generalized sentiments of support and not offers of, well, our staff will come down and offer to do, I don't know, something or other from your office. What we need is money, I'm afraid. And I appreciate that you will appreciate me coming straight to the point, which brings me to the fourth and last point. How can you be part of this? And I ask this. Has Guernsey been good to you? Because it sure as hell been good to me over the last 50 years, but particularly the last 30 years of my commercial life here in Guernsey. I'm sure the same applies to many of you in the room as well. And this is all of our opportunities to give back. Ask yourself, do you agree with this statement that you can judge the true nature of a civilized society by how it treats the most vulnerable in its midst? And if the answer is, actually, I really support that statement, I would ask you to do something about it. Now, usually there would be a bucket in which you would place £200 or £300 each, something of that order. We don't have that here. We will have at the end of the day at the back, there are brochures and there'll be a couple of my colleagues there waiting to have a word with you. But if you think, actually, I support what Grow does and I support not just theoretically, but in practice, can I ask you to do one of two things? One, come and buy any plants that you ever need from us. We're great. We've got a fantastic selection of plants, really, really good, from what I would consider to be the ordinary, if you want to buy tomato plants or bedding plants, what have you, to some more interesting ones as well. But if you're thinking, I'd like to do more, and we need people to do more, and I could start pointing fingers at people in the room, but everyone here is a member of Guernsey Society, and we need to help. Then can I please ask you to get hold of me or to get hold of any one of my colleagues on the board? Our website is the place to do it. There are some brochures there, and say, do you know, I'm interested in giving, whether that's your own money, or you think actually on behalf of my business, or I'm a trustee or somehow hold money for an estate or something. I'm sure that those funds would want to go in that direction as well. Get hold of us. We will come and show you round. We will talk you through in more detail than I can do today what we do and exactly how your funds will be used, because they will be used for a very direct benefit here on the island for some of the most vulnerable in the island. So get hold of us, and I hope to be seeing several of you, showing you around the vinery site, explaining what we do, and welcoming you to the club of those who have given so generously already. Thank you very much.
Mark, thank you very much for your plea for assistance, which I'm sure won't go unheard. Welcome everyone here today to our latest in the energy discussions. We have a very experienced panel here in front of us. By way of introduction, I should warn you that we have Lindsay de Sausmarez, who's the political lead here. The other three members of the panel have all actually worked in at least two of the organisations they represent, and one of them has worked for all three of the organisations which they represent. So there's no shortage of talent here, and hopefully no shortage of answers either to the issues and so on that we're going to explore. I mean, the purpose of this discussion is to consider, with the help of our panel, the implications of the energy policy, which was approved sort of 2 years ago, and more particularly to explore the energy strategy, which is currently under discussion at the moment and should be put forward to the States in the fourth quarter of this year, all being well. Energy is a fearsomely complex subject, and I've heard countless people say to me that they have the right answers. I can assure you that is absolutely not the case at all. There are just some answers that are better than others, but there are certainly no simple solutions, and solutions are obviously very nuanced depending on the perspective you're coming from. The impact of the changes going on in the energy sector are going to be very profound, and none more so than the situation we've seen evidence with the goings on in the Ukraine. It's worth pointing out that the impact of this we've already started to be seen in practice, and we've witnessed very large electricity price rises and energy price rises globally. In Guernsey, that hasn't really hit us yet, certainly as far as electricity is concerned, and this is largely down to the fact that GEL took out a long-term hedge with EDF and RTE back in 2019. So we've just had very modest price rises coming through to date, which many other jurisdictions would be incredibly envious of. So it is something to bear in mind when we contextualize the discussion that we're having here. So it's probably right to say that actually without these hedges in place, we might well be paying 50% more for our electricity than we're currently paying. Now, the flip side of that is it can encourage new investment in things like renewables, alternatives, and so on to assist fulfilling our obligations agreed under the environmental issues that were approved in the Energy Policy 2020. Just by way of reminder, the energy policy concentrated on security, affordability, and also the environment. The electricity strategy is slightly more nuanced. It additionally considers the impact of demand management, which is often forgotten. That's basically using stuff better or using less of what you got to do the same thing. And secondly, the impact of, or the desire to achieve, a market-based electricity supply market which engenders competition and clearly will be in the benefit of consumers. But first of all, if I could ask Lindsay to contextualize the energy policy and the electricity strategy for us now from a political perspective, that'll hope set the scene for our discussion. So Lindsay.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I have actually just come back from my first holiday in 6 years or something, so I'm hoping I can get my brain back into work gear in time. But yes, as Rupert says, the states approved the energy policy back in May 2020, so some time ago, and it was a really huge bit of work. It won't have escaped anyone's notice that we are in the process of an energy transition here. So there were 6 key objectives to the energy policy, which were in no particular order: decarbonisation, which set targets in line with all the international norms, so net zero by 2050, and it's a bit of a mouthful, this one, 57% reduction on 1990 levels by 2030. Security and resilience of supply, consumer value and choice, I've written them down just to make sure I don't miss one, equity and fairness, supporting a vibrant economy, and greater energy independence. So those are the 6 objectives. And the energy policy obviously encompasses the entire energy sector, not just electricity. Some of the key takeaways, it's a really big bit of work. Some of the key takeaways from the energy policy were an approval in principle for a cable known as GF1 in the trade, so a direct cable between Guernsey and France for interconnection purposes, but that is subject to a business case and all that case being made. Also approval in principle to reduce our energy security. At the moment, we've got very high level of energy security, which is known to many of you in the room, I'm sure, as net N-2, and that has been reduced in principle to N-1, but again, subject to a bit more work being done on that, or some other appropriate level. And the concept of a shared grid and equitable access to that grid to encourage a competitive environment. So after the energy policy, we also had the climate change policy, which reconfirmed, I suppose, the decarbonisation principles and confirmed that we will be setting those in legislation, so they will be legally binding. And the major focus at the moment, as Rupert mentioned, is the electricity strategy, which really comprises 3 sub-strategies, I suppose, and it deals with the 3 major components, which are supply, demand, and that market structure. So that's the bit of work that we're doing at the moment. We're working with subject matter experts. It's a very iterative and inclusive process. It's absolutely essential we work with industry, including all of the people on this panel. So it's a major bit of work. We're working to a really ambitious timeline. I do have to give my apologies to the officers in the room here being really pushed politically. We are very, very keen to get that debated this year as soon as we can, but we can't cut corners. It has to be very thorough bit of work, and that is the platform on which we will be able to move forward with the certainty that we need, that businesses need to make those crucial investment decisions, and we as an island need to know how we're going to achieve this energy transition. So I hope that gives a little bit more
Thank you very
context.
much. Needless to say, a discussion like this works much better with audience participation. So if you'd like to catch my eye on any particular issues that you believe are relevant, which I can then ask the panel, please feel free, put your hand up. There is a roving mic somewhere around, which should be available. And again, I will repeat any questions you ask to ensure that panelists have fully heard the question, if you happen to be in the back part of the room or whatever. I alluded to the large price rises that we're likely to see in the forthcoming period and so on. And clearly, Lindsay mentioned another cable being considered as part of that strategy. Alan, can you tell us anything about the business case for the cable at the moment, and whether or when that might start to appear in the public domain?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So I think Lindsay mentioned a key part of the electricity strategy is, where does electricity come from, the supply strategy. So it was quite clear from the energy policy debate that, or the policy letter, that further interconnection was a really important part of creating security of supply. But also the second interconnector will also give us a greater low carbon capacity to the island. So it's a really, really important thing. So in terms of the business case, I think the energy policy asked us if we bring that forward. It's now so integral to the electricity strategy that we're sort of holding it in abeyance slightly, although it's been looked at internally. But it's such a core part now of where our electricity comes from and how we make that secure, that actually it's more tied up with the electricity strategy. So I would imagine it's probably about the same sort of timing.
Thank you. And in terms of our ability to sort of work with Jersey and so on, I mean, how does the process work in terms of ensuring we work together as islands to secure a better supply deal?
So we work together in two ways. One is a power purchase agreement with France, and I think you've alluded to the fact that we're quite well off at the moment because we're quite insulated in a way from the current volatility in electricity markets. Now, we can't be insulated from that volatility forever, but we are for a good couple of years. That means we are focusing on the other part of the Channel Islands electricity grid, is about where does future investment go. So we do work quite closely together. I would say energy transition may likely make us go off in different strategic directions. That's always a possibility. But we are working together. Certainly, we're starting to look at renegotiating that power purchase agreement, which is the most immediate thing. And then after that, we'll look at our investment plans.
Okay, I'm conscious of the fact that I've been asking Alan all the questions so far. I'm just going to get another one in quickly, actually, which almost certainly will be Alan's to answer. You'll be aware at the back end of last week that a paper was published to request a tariff price rise for GEL to reinvest in the network, because there's been chronic underinvestment in the network over the last 10 years or so, and clearly that has been restrained by the revenue side, where prices have been more or less flat in nominal terms for the thick end of 10 years. One thing that intrigued me was the proposed price rises are designed merely just to maintain the current network rather than enhance the network to facilitate technological developments such as distributed generation and supply and so on, which is crucial in order for our environmental standards and so on to be enhanced. Do you have any comment on that?
I think initially, just to say, so obviously, whilst we're insulated from the volatility of the market, for the majority of our electricity generation or importation, we're not completely immune to it. So what we decided, we're not passing that on at the moment. So while prices can't go down, we're not actually putting prices up associated with the commodity market. However, it's quite clear we've significantly underinvested for such a significant period now that we do need to start investing. And rather than preempt what electricity strategy says in terms of how quickly we want to transition the island, we've decided to just go for a sort of baseline investment model, which is basically saying, let's maintain what we've got today, where we can, let's improve it to allow some energy transition to happen, but we're not going out full scale decarbonisation mode. I think we're going to wait for electricity strategy. How quickly do we want to do it? Where do we want to do it first? So that's why we're sort of holding it as a baseline, but certainly it will need to be slightly higher when we come to decarbonising the island. So this rise is totally associated with that baseline CapEx plan.
Yeah, I mean, decarbonisation of the island is an integral part of the energy policy. Clearly, two other panelists here will have probably quite a lot to say about that as well. And maybe I could just ask Alex first. What role do you see for fossil fuels enabling the transition from from where we are at the moment to where we'd like to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So hello, everybody. I think what we need to really do is take a sort of pause and say, what time frame do we want that energy transition to take place? I think there's a bit of a sort of culture at the moment of a sort of council culture on fossil fuels. But what really is important is how can we get where we need to go in the time frame we need to, as smoothly, as stably, as cost effective, and as proportionally as possible. And to do that, fossil fuels will play a role in the foreseeable future. What needs to happen is what is that change and that transition? So, for example, in the case of gas, fossil fuel gas is on the lowest form of fossil fuel in terms of carbon emissions. And I think what's important is also looking at environmental impact. So again, environmental impact wise, sort of locally, it's the lowest form again of fossil fuels. So it's, in answer to your question, fossil fuels is going to play a role in the next decade, 2 decades, 3 decades. It's the transition it's going to take. And also it's that transition from, say, for example, gas, from fossil fuel gas to green gases, and what shape or form that takes. So it's here for the foreseeable future. Do
you see it playing any role in the sort of reduced resilience model of sort of coming down to sort of N-1 or N even? Yeah. And if so, how might that manifest itself? Yes, absolutely. And I think this is, again, I think we need to move from, say, a sort of black and white and saying, is it all electricity, or is there something else? And I think this is where we've got to look at what's that combination, what's an integrated energy transition. And as part of that, it could be, how can gas play a role in that security of supply? How else could we fuel on island generation during that transition? What have we got that's available to us now in terms of the existing market holders that we can work together and say, what does CHP, combined heat and power, mean? What does community scale heat and power mean? What does backup generation look like? And I think that these are the conversations that we need to be around the table and having that conversation as to how to get there. And that's what an energy transition really is what we got to use to get where we need to without cancelling straight away one or the other option. Thank you. In terms of competition, this is a subject that is close to the heart of many other potential suppliers of electricity, and the grid is obviously central, or front and central to that. Bob, question for you. How do you believe access to the grid is best managed to engender a competitive supply market?
I think, good afternoon, everybody, and I hope you can hear me at the back. I think the important thing about what we've just been talking about leads into that, really, that the energy transition is actually happening now. And I think actually islanders are voting with their feet. I don't think it's a pause issue. I think inaction shouldn't be on the agenda. In fact, let's have a show of hands. How many people in this room own an electric vehicle? Wow. How many people have got an electric bike? Anybody got solar panels? Come and see me afterwards. Yeah. So, you multiply that across the island and people are already voting to go to the electrification route. With competition, I remember 3 or 4 years ago being involved with Lindsay's team on the energy policy with Alan and Rubis and other people, all the energy providers in the island. And all of us said that we needed enhanced security and enhanced resilience. We all bought into that. And we also tentatively all said we wanted some competition and choice. Now, obviously, we are an energy provider. We're a licensed generating company as well, and we hope to move forward with that. But I think the key thing is that if you ask islanders broadly whether you want competition and choice, I think most of them would say yes. What do you think about that? Show of hands. You want some competition? Okay, maybe half the people. And we welcome working with Lindsay's team as part of the electricity strategy, because I think for all of us, the electricity strategy is absolutely crucial in sorting these three key areas about demand, supply, and market conditions. And so we hope that collaboratively we can have an open network, a network that we can all support and pay for using that network, so all islanders can benefit from what we think is very important, which is locally generated renewable energy. Because one of the key factors included in the energy policy was that independence should be achieved, greater energy independence. And, you know, we're not the only company that provides solar products and battery storage. Our customers, not including community schemes, already are producing 1 gigawatt hour of locally generated renewable electricity at the moment. And so, you know, the greater amount of that energy produced locally, I think it's better for the island in the long run.
Okay. Lindsay, a question for you on sort of competition. I mean, clearly it's going to be very much embedded in the electricity strategy. How are you and your team looking at it in terms of ensuring the, for want of a better word, a sort of level playing field access and so on, without disadvantaging, say, for example, the operator of the grid who has to pay to maintain the network? What are these sort of inbuilt conflicts that you're wrestling with to enable that to happen?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the conflicts and didn't ask me what the solution was. That's the work that we're working on right now. But actually, I think Bob mentioned the collaborative way we went around developing the energy policy in the first place. And we plan and we are continuing that collaborative approach through this electricity strategy. It's a slightly misleading question. I think as Alex and Bob are both kind of quite well identified, or Alex has identified, you can't just look at electricity in a silo. It very much sits within that broader energy sector picture, and it is all about that that transition, that energy transition, how we achieve those objectives. One of the themes, I'm sure the others will agree with me, one of the things that came out absolutely loud and clear through that energy forum process that we went, that informed the development of the energy policy, was the principle of a level playing field. It was really, really key. So as I said, when I gave a little bit of opening context, one of the things that was agreed through the energy policy was this principle of, in electricity terms, certainly, you know, a shared grid. So what we didn't want was duplicate grids popping up left, right, and centre, you know, competing against each other. I think another aspect that people are quite rightly wary of, you know, we're a very small place. We're wary of perhaps inadvertently creating a situation in which cherry picking might become a real issue. So the classic analogy is Royal Mail and you know, the couriers that came in and sort of creamed off the really profitable stuff. So that's just something that we have to be aware of as well. But yeah, absolutely. Really, it comes down to what's in the best interests of islanders, and there are conflicts there. You know, it's really challenging because a lot of the objectives, you can agree to each and every one of those objectives, but there are trade-offs between them. You know, you can put more on energy security, but that comes at a cost of affordability. And so, you know, a competitive market is a wonderful thing, but we have to be focused on what it's actually delivering and not just do it for its own sake.
Thank you. I mean, Alan, as GEL, as the operator of the grid, clearly has, you know, its perspective as well. It has to fund the investment to manage the energy transition, which is forecast to take, you know, 20, 30 years or so, and clearly will cost many millions, the first part of which we're just entering now. How does competition look from your perspective, and how do you see the equity in competition at the moment?
So I think I agree with just about everything that's been said. So the energy transition is a journey. It's not something we're going to achieve overnight. So I think, you know, we've all got to work together collaboratively to achieve that. I think competition is great where it adds more consumer choice and greater consumer value, but not so successful outcome is not much choice and more cost to customers. I don't think that works. In terms of open access to the grid, you know, look, anything's possible. I think we need to be very careful of how much the sort of systems and structures to create that liberalised environment costs. And again, that comes back to my point about, you know, introducing more cost than is necessary, or more cost than there being benefits. But where we buy electricity from, Guernsey Electricity is a bit ambivalent in a way. You know, we'll buy it from the best place for Guernsey. You know, if that's locally generated renewables, that's fine. If it's from France, that's fine. If it's from Europe, it's fine. So I don't think, you know, once that fair and level playing field's in place, we've got an issue. You know, I think it's what's right for Guernsey. And it's what's right for Guernsey as a community that's important. I think it doesn't come down to individual operators' best interests. It's got to be about what's right for this island and what's right for the community. And that's where the company's position is.
Okay, so I mean, the role of the regulator has been somewhat sort of downgraded over the last period and so on, you know, by the states for, you know, one reason or another. What do you see? Or this is a collective question. I'm going to be happy to have volunteers for this one. What do you see as the or how do you see the role of the regulator in terms of engendering competition going forward?
Let me go first because they're stood at the back, actually. Afternoon, guys. Look, I think the role of the regulator has only reduced in one element. That's to do with the approval of pricing in the supply market or supply license. The role of the regulator is still very active across the rest of the licensed sectors. But the energy policy was quite clear that actually in future, it's not just electricity regulation we need energy regulation. And it was also very clear that it's got to be a proportionate licensing framework that works for us as an island. So I think there's a role for the regulation in the future. I think we need to decide what that looks like to meet the energy market. So I guess it's an important part of the market strategy as part of the electricity strategy. So I still think there's still a role. And I think it just needs to be proportionate to what we need as an island.
Hello, Alex or Bob, do you have? Alex, you have it.
So absolutely, I think there's a role in terms of regulation. So my personal view is, I think I'm coming from it from two angles. One, obviously, as a company that's looking to sort of engage in the market, but also from an environmental perspective. We can look at Ofgem in the UK. Their role, they wear two hats. One is in terms of fairness and for customers, and in terms of choice and fair competition. But the other one is ensuring that there is a proportionate energy transition. So they're effectively holding companies to account in terms of how we're going to get to net zero in the energy transition. So I think in terms of Guernsey, there's a really key role. And I think what we need to understand is, where does the state start and finish? And where does regulation start and finish in terms of sort of guiding and steering that energy transition and that net zero piece? So I would say the regulator's most definitely got a role, and absolutely in terms of across the energy sector.
Bob.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. Regulators play a good role. Anti-competitive activity, we see it in all the sectors that they regulate at the moment. That's goes ahead. In terms of the pricings that have been taken out of regulation now with STSB, I don't know if businesses think that they would like to have been able to be consulted on the price increases that have gone through. I don't know how that process works now. So we saw the 9% like everybody else did, and then it's agreed. So I don't know what the detail of that is and how that could be a bit more transparent in the future, because one of the things that we need to understand are what tariffs are for the future for islanders, because we don't want to give misleading investment opportunities for islanders and solar panels if we're not sure what's coming next. And so I don't know, that might be something to consider.
Well, don't feel shy about tucking into your sandwiches. It's quite all right. We're batting on through here, so please go ahead.
Yeah, just sort of carrying on from what Bob was saying, I think just in terms of that regulation piece again, I think what you touched on there in terms of that level playing field for investors and for people who want to enter the market and existing players, it's very much saying what does that level playing field look like, and how do how does industry and customers and interested parties all work together? And I think, you know, as Lindsay said, and as Alan said, we're a small island. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't need multiple organisations and different committees. What we need is a central location that we can do that. But at the same time, we all need to be held to account. And I think it's making sure that we've got the right hats on the right people or organisations to do that. So I think that's the question that I would really say is, how do we make sure it's whatever is in place is proportionate, but also that we're all held to account for the same things at the same time.
While we're on the subject of regulation, does anyone in the audience have any issues they'd like to raise? James.
Hi there. On the subject of regulation, could I just ask the question as to what your views are on regulatory alignment with Jersey, the ability of a level playing field across the Channel Islands, potentially to make the islands collectively a more attractive market to enter and provide the choice?
So Jersey v Guernsey. Any thoughts, any views?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think that's at the end of the day, we've got to work together as islands regionally as well, and collectively, whatever we can do to work together, I think would make us far more attractive to developers, give more security, and find ways that we can work together. And certainly in terms of, we're now Guernsey Energy, by the way, as of last week. So Guernsey Gas is now Guernsey Energy. We might talk about that later. But in terms of Guernsey Energy and the equivalent in Jersey, we already are seeing the potential and the opportunities of working together as a company. So I can see that if we could be under regulation, under the same regulation, that's very advantageous.
I guess implicit in the question there is whether or not there should be further sort of commercial representation or commonality between Jersey and Guernsey, which I know is an age-old question, which are largely down to sort of politics rather than economics and commerciality and so on. But I don't know, Lindsay, do you have any sort of views on that at all?
I can certainly speak to the political. So part of the electricity strategy, which the part which is looking at the market structure, we have a steering group which includes political representation, not just from E&I, but actually from STSB, Economic Development, and PNR as well. And we have given an explicit steer that we want to consider those options. We don't want to be insular. We are interested in opportunities for alignment, and so that is certainly something that bit of work will be looking at. And also at a political level, we have agreed in principle to work to explore opportunities around potential supply with Jersey as well. So speaking personally, I was there was it yesterday, day before? You know, I've actually found certainly their offices and the politicians that I come into contact with have been really easy to work with, and certainly I don't think we should be closing off any avenues at all. And we're certainly interested in having a look to see what could be, you know, potentially done.
I mean, more to the point, are there any sort of commercial benefits that could benefit both islands by JEL and GL working together, either by virtue of ownership or operational agreements and so on, or is this fanciful and wishful thinking? Alan, probably one for you.
In an ideal world, absolutely. You know, I think we're all companies are conflicted by economy of scale, you know, as particularly asset intensive businesses. So there's bound to be opportunities and synergies where you could actually save costs for customers. I think it comes back to the fact, you know, sometimes the islands are in competition, they're not always in partnership mode. And actually what we not want is any of that sort of core infrastructure to be used as a lever against one island or the other. So I think if you could ring fence those things, I think it'd be ideal, but I think otherwise, you know, it's more difficult. Just coming back on another point, I think about cost reflectivity, or cost transparency. I think that's a really important point. And actually the energy policy was not too bad in this area. It did look at the fact of actually there does need to be that transparency in the energy market in terms of how you recover costs that have already been spent and how you reflect future costs into the market, and how you provide absolute clear signals to everyone about where they're driven from and how they're constructed, so people can make very informed investment decisions. And I think that's one of the things. Obviously, we've done this small increase at the moment, but the next big piece of work is looking at how we restructure our tariffs to give that transparency to the market and the different sectors of the market as well.
Okay, which is an interesting segue into demand management. I guess. I mean, demand management, as I alluded to, forms a key part of the electricity strategy, and it's basically using what you've got better or using it more efficiently. Alan just touched on the notion of tariffs and changing the current tariff structure to assist in that, but it actually is just one part of a much bigger topic and range of tools that are available to manage that more effectively. I mean, just still on the subject of tariffs at the moment, while we're there, can you talk through the sort of change of tariffs that you're considering and how the development of a tariff structure might evolve over the next period? It may be through technological reasons or economic or otherwise, but perhaps you'd just like to give us some insight into the audience.
Okay, so I think the first part of our restructure is all about making it very clear what costs are fixed and need to be recovered, particularly for the grid and security supply, and what costs are variable and can be adjusted by particularly, demand side response. And in terms of demand side response, I think there's both signals we can give through time of use tariffs to make sure we optimize those assets better. And there'll also be technological advances. We talk about smart grids and smart homes, where actually we can potentially, as an industry, take some responsibility for that demand side response to help people use energy more wisely. So I think between technology, market signals, and this sort of transparency in terms of tariffs, so people can make these more informed choices, that's the way we'll manage demand.
Okay, I mean, clearly this is brings on onto sort of technological developments such as, say, things like storage and so on. And this could be at grid level storage, or it could be at sort of domestic level and so on. Maybe Bob, can you just talk through some of the initiatives that you guys are looking at, which may assist in terms of managing demand and using it more effectively and achieving effectively what is the holy grail of electrical management, which is in terms of having a flat demand curve?
I can allude to a few things there, excuse me. It's interesting, I meet a lot of people who say that solar panels and solar energy is intermittent, because obviously at night time the sun goes down and the sun's there all day. You've got winter summer differences and so on. In all of our systems that we've deployed, we can virtually estimate within 3 to 5% what the annual yield is from our solar systems. And in response to that, the answer is actually largely on your table. It's like water. Rainfall is intermittent. So what do we do with that through our streams? And they go to the reservoirs and it's used when it's needed. I said that we've put out we've got over 1+ megawatt of private solar systems across the island at the moment. And we've also deployed nearly 1.5, I think, megawatt hours of battery storage facilities, so that people are actually generating their own electricity and they're storing it. After they store it, the electric merchant heaters are used to heat their water, and also into the electric vehicles as well to charge that. It's interesting, I was looking at the old PwC numbers for when the energy policy discussions were on about the expected increase in electricity demand over the next 30 years. We don't see that much of it. I don't know what Alan's probably got these latest numbers, but there's about 330, 340 gigawatt hours a year. We're seeing customers wanting to use their own energy at home, so we can't actually know exactly what the total is on the island. And we're just one provider of solar panels on the island. So collectively, again, under the electricity strategy, I'd like to see some bit of joined up recording of how many units are actually being consumed across the island, so we know as an island what we're doing and how we're moving forward on that energy transition. It's the old adage, you can only manage what you measure. But so in terms of the technology is there today. I'm not trying to sell the product here, we're Tesla agents. I had a phone call just a couple of weeks ago with number 3 in Europe from Tesla, and they're looking at options of larger, actually network size battery storage systems that we're looking at. And there's several suppliers of those, and I think they'll play a very important role in the future up to 2050, when we may have 20, 30 megawatts of solar on the island and a similar capacity of storage as well. I'd also like to see maybe 50 or 70 megawatts of solar in Jersey and a similar amount of storage. So together, the islands can work together and actually transit that energy and use that energy effectively. As I said, it's homegrown solar electricity. Let's try and storage as best we can. The prices of energy storage are coming down, apart from a recent hiccup with the invasion of Ukraine. But this technology is available now, and we're deploying it every week.
How does the role of storage change if one were to have a second cable, for example? Because clearly one would have instant demand on tap. I mean, a lot of people, I think, would be pleased to see the development of further renewables on island, whether it's sort of or offshore wind or solar on island and so on. What sort of flexibility do you believe an extra cable would afford towards the development?
I think it's what Alan was saying earlier. I mean, you know, the reason for the second cable is primarily security, and so also flexibility for, you know, import and export renewable energy. So actually, again, with the strategy, it all fits in. 2 cables provides greater stability and security and resilience. We are the only show in town. Alan's running the whole company there, and they've got to make sure that all of us have got electricity. And with renewables, a key transmission network is absolutely critical, and that's why I understand the investment costs are needed for that.
Okay. Sorry, you go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, just sort of adding on in terms of sort of opportunities for storage. I think as well as looking at, you know, as Bob said, in terms of renewables, we've also got a part to play is what could hydrogen have in the future in terms of an opportunity for storage. Because we've got to think of, you know, what's the ideal scenario? We get to a point where we've got on-island generation in terms of renewables. We've got a huge amount of energy. What do we do with it? Absolutely a second cable in terms of exporting if we want to. What other options does that have in terms of storage? You know, what role could hydrogen have? We don't know how far away that's going to be. Technology is advancing all the time, but that's another option that we could have.
So you're talking about hydrogen in terms of taking electricity out of the system from surplus on-island generation, using it to manufacture hydrogen, and then using that as a source of energy.
Well, I think this is, yeah, absolutely. And I think this is, you know, we can look at test cases that are happening elsewhere. You know, we can look at what's happening up in Orkney at the moment. They're in that situation there. They're sort of leading the way in terms of technology and advancement. You know, what we've got to do as an island is we've got to say, well, what's happening elsewhere? How can we look at what other islands are doing? And what they're doing is they're using that surplus rather than exporting it. What they're saying is, how can we use it to look at sort of the wider energy transition, moving into transport, moving into looking at vessels and ships and sort of air transport, as to how can we use the energy as effectively as possible. So it's very much battery storage plays a role, but as we're hearing, sort of, you know, in terms of supply, in terms of you know, the components that are required have environmental impacts. But then what part can hydrogen play and other green gases? I
mean, storage is means different things to different people, and I mean, just for the audience benefits, we're not talking here about storing electricity generated in summer and letting it out in winter. It just doesn't work like that. I mean, long-term storage in this context, we're talking about in terms of over a 24-hour cycle. So, I mean, again, question for Alan, what do you believe is how much potential storage capacity does one need to manage the grid effectively, even if one did have a second cable, which ostensibly would be able to take up the slack? What sort of market do you see for grid scale storage in Guernsey?
It's a really interesting one, energy storage. So today, it's quite inefficient because actually to take spare electricity and then either store it in a battery and then bring it back again is inefficient, and to create hydrogen is inefficient. And it really is a world where there's surplus or excess energy that you'd start looking at those technologies. But I would say battery storage particularly has got a role to play in the market today. It's good for arbitrage. You know, you might want to fill it up when it's cheap and let it out when it's expensive. It's also potentially good for Guernsey Electricity in terms of optimizing the use of our single cable currently and stopping us running diesel engines, you know, for very short excursions over the cable capacity. So I think there is a role for energy storage, particularly batteries today. I think it could also actually help with the decarbonisation of heat on the island as well by optimising the use of oil and gas, and potentially also working with electricity to decarbonise properties. Because I do believe, you know, that this energy transition is a journey. We've got to remember it's a journey. It's not something we're going to achieve just overnight. It's going to take years and years and years, and we need to start thinking longer term.
And I think that segues quite nicely into another aspect. when we talk about demand, it's really easy to do what we've just done and jump straight to all the technological solutions, and they're really exciting. But actually, there's some far more boring but equally important aspects to demand management, which is starting with the source of the issue, which is, as you very neatly encapsulated it when you introduced this segment, about how we can use energy more efficiently in the first place. And we've just started touching on heating. I think there are two major areas here. One is heating, space heating, and the other is transport. And I think of those, space heating is, that's a biggie. Obviously, we've got a major bit of work around building standards and things, and it's easy enough to stipulate what standards should be for energy efficiency for new builds, but most of the housing stock in the island is existing housing stock, and much of that is really not very energy efficient. So that's going to be a major challenge, I think, and a very serious set of considerations there. And in terms of transport, it's very easy again to think, oh, well, we'll just wave a magic wand. We know that we're phasing out internal combustion engines. We're pegged to the UK's date, which is currently 2030. So, we'll wave a magic wand and transport is sorted. But it's not that simple. Again, I think especially when it comes to transport, we need to be thinking first and foremost in terms of low energy before we even get to energy efficiency, and internal combustion engines as well. If we think about the transition, the role that they've had in the transition, the reason fuel duty goes up above and beyond inflation year on year, and we have to run to stand still in revenue terms, is because there's a 30% efficiency gain over every decade in terms of that technology. So, the technology is galloping, but I think there are some really basic and more boring but very, very important issues that we need to consider on the demand side as well.
So, I mean, you touched on the space heating issue as being the single most difficult area for managing demand, and in most people's language that revolves around housing insulation and as a means of using energy more efficiently. I mean, that's a hugely intractable political problem, and it also is going to take an extremely long time to do it. If one looks in terms of housing replacement in terms of scale, we're talking decades here. Do you see any chance of any government initiatives and so on to accelerate that process, or is that just a non-starter on the agenda from a cost perspective at the moment?
Oh, I can see a Guernsey Press headline, 100 pages on this one. Okay. Obviously, this is work that we're doing at the moment. I cannot possibly hang a hat on any particular hook, but I mean, personally, this is a major area of focus. What I would say, though, is that there are already market solutions to this. So, yes, obviously, we need to look at what the government's role in this should be and could be. But actually, there are already businesses that provide a market solution in that they come along. A lot of the problem with people who have a house that isn't particularly energy efficient is they don't necessarily they've got enough money to pay their bills, but they don't necessarily have enough capital to invest in making those improvements, such as insulation, etc. So there are business models out there which come along with the capital and say, okay, well, you carry on paying what you would have paid your energy bills to us. We will invest the capital in making your home more energy efficient, in terms of its insulation, its appliances, whatever needs to be done. Maybe go to Bob. And then the business makes their money back by the difference, recouping the difference essentially between the money that is coming into them for a set period of time from that householder and what they are actually paying to the energy providers. So they are benefiting from the energy savings. So it's a really interesting, I'm not here to plug a particular product, but it is really interesting that the market itself has come up with solutions. So I think, obviously we need to be looking to see what role government could and should be playing, but also there are potentially market solutions as well.
Okay. Alex.
Yeah, just sort of following on as well. I sort of alluded earlier to the change in direction of Guernsey Gas to Guernsey Energy. And part of that is very much recognising the role in demand management and energy management. So that's very much where we see the shape of that energy market and where we're going in terms of products and services to support exactly that. And I think in the panel session that we had a month ago, I sort of use my analogy of the energy transition, where we've got, you know, the sort of time management jar where you've got big rocks, and that's obviously the conversations we're having about Tidal, what role does Tidal have, and the cable have, and the lights. But it's all of the, you've then got, you know, you fill it up, say, well, that's full, but then you put all the gravel in, and then you put the sand in, and then you put the water in. And that's really where we're moving in terms of Guernsey Energy, is saying what can we do, and what can we offer the island in terms of that way to bring that demand down. So it's absolutely a key part in that energy transition.
Does anyone in the audience, and perhaps in the building industry or construction industry, have any comments or thoughts on that they'd like to raise? Is that Nigel? Yeah.
Thanks, Rupert. Yeah, I'm really pleased that the panel have mentioned measurement, because Guernsey at the moment, we don't embrace any sort of measuring tools like energy performance certificates, irrespective of energy performance ratings, MEES or minimum energy efficient standards for domestic and commercial properties, or when we're building new ones, the standard assessment procedures for new buildings. I just wondered what each member of the panel might think about implementing some of those methods of measurement going forward to achieve the net zero carbon by 2050.
Do you want to take that, Lindsay?
Certainly in terms of building standards and regulations, there was a bit of an upgrade to get us from where we were, which was very far behind, to a bit better in the previous political term. My understanding, I've been talking with the Development and Planning Authority about this. So in terms of the regulations around new builds, there is a big bit of work, as I understand it, in the UK at the moment, which is it's out for consultation, and that will inform where their new building standards end up. And that will help inform where Guernsey is. I think we can, the answer that I got from the DPA was that it's easy enough to bring ourselves in line with the UK, but to go above and beyond that requires more consultation. And certainly I know from conversations with industry and construction industry, is one of the things that we seem to be struggling with a little bit is actually experience. You know, there's some really interesting sustainable building techniques and materials, and they might be technically available here, but we don't have very much experience of them yet. So that's my understanding of one of the things where the market maybe isn't as far forward as we might like it to be. So yeah, that helps inform, but I completely agree that you can only manage what you measure, what you can measure, and it is really important that we get to grips with exactly what we are using and how we can use it more efficiently.
Just expanding on that sort of point a bit, actually, in terms of potential collision of sort of demand management and sort of environmental considerations, is the issue of merit order of dispatch. At the moment, GEL has to basically provide electricity at the cheapest cost at all times, which may well conflict with the energy policy itself. But maybe, Alan, can you just lend a bit of colour in terms of how one is going to manage that sort of internally, insofar as, so for example, you may have a surplus of sort of inverted commas free electrical energy from sort of source from solar sources or tidal or offshore wind and so on, which may be more expensive than getting it from the cable and so on, but which will satisfy the environmental criteria to a much greater degree. I mean, do you see inherent conflicts here, or is this just one of the things that's got to be managed?
So we currently have to dispatch generators on an ascending order of prices. Now, basically, as you just said, it's cheapest first, followed by the next cheapest up. I think that's very much based on the old world, where it's about cheap today, forget tomorrow. So I think now a clear part of electricity strategy will be about the merit order of different pieces of kit on the island. So I think the energy policy was quite clear that you have to start saying, actually, you might need to put a sort of direction into dispatch local renewable generation first, even if it's more expensive than cheaper low carbon import. So I think it does form an important part. You touched on something then about what does the future wholesale commodity look like from an electricity perspective. Now, as jurisdictions start putting more and more wind and more solar in, on a very windy, sunny summer's afternoon, at the weekend, you might find there's way too much electricity on the grid. And it might actually be cheaper for the system operators to say, rather than shut that wind farm down, I'm going to give a market signal that actually I'll pay you to take it today, or I'll pay you to take it this afternoon. And the reason I say that, I was actually in the gas industry in the sort of mid 2000s when that exact situation happened on a day in, I think it was 2007, where I was paying 30p a therm for gas every single day. And then one day of the week, National Grid said, I'll pay you 6p to take it. And that was because there was too much gas in the UK. And I think those sort of market dynamics are going to really change. So I think this is where this sort of time of use and market signal piece is really important in the future, in terms of we need to get the technology in where we can actually signal to a customer, look, this afternoon, do your washing. You can have it for free, or it'd be much cheaper. Now that involves an awful lot of technology. I wouldn't say we're there just yet, but we need to start planning, and so when we start looking at demand strategy, it's got to be very much technology based about how we prepare for the future.
Oh.
Yes, it's a very interesting point, Alan. And in fact, in the UK, I'll just talk about Tesla again, because Tesla partnered up with Octopus Energy. I don't know if you've heard of Octopus in the UK. If you have a Tesla Powerwall in your house, or multiples thereof, up to 10 of them, if you sign up with Octopus, Octopus Energy actually will give you like a 10p, a 24-hour 10p tariff for your electricity of your home, but they get access to your Powerwall. So what that means is they work with National Grid, and if National Grid are getting a peak of electricity demand, Octopus then get access to up to 35,000 Powerwalls and release that energy over a couple of hours period to get rid of that peak usage. So that's the sort of thing where, you know, Guernsey and Jersey will be looking at in the future. And when we get several hundred of those out on the network, we'll also be having those conversations, I think. And again, goes back to the first sentence. It's about collaborative working together technically to make all this work, you know, because the last thing we want is if there were, you know, the links became disconnected for any reason, we've got to make sure the islands are still secure and resilient, and don't want any transient instabilities or things like that. So all those complicated things have got to be looked at as we move forward. But
and the significance of that, it's quite clear. I mean, we've relied on a sort of hub and spoke type distribution system, but I mean, what we're getting onto now is very much a distributed network, which almost by definition has greater resilience built into it by virtue of some of the technology that is now becoming available and is economically viable. So, you know, the shape and transitioning of the electricity market and the structure of how electricity is distributed is going to be changing quite markedly. I mean, our previous sort of questions have partly focused on sort of environmental responsibility as well. Going on to that now, I mean, since GJ1 was introduced 20 years ago, which resulted in a massive step change downwards in terms of Guernsey's own carbon footprint, it'd be pretty easy to say not a lot has happened since, on the whole. And so the question here, I guess, is what do you believe, I mean, this is a political question, I guess, what do you believe is the sort of critical next major step towards achieving the path towards net zero? Is it a combination of all these other technologies we've been talking about? Is it another cable? How through what lens do you look at this problem?
Well, I might have mentioned this bit of work that we're doing at the moment, which is precisely, I don't have the answers. I can't sit here and say what the answer is, because that is the hugely important bit of work that we're doing right now. And it's really complex and interrelated. And as I said earlier, and as other panelists have alluded to, there are certain trade-offs as well. You know, it is complex. I mean, from a political perspective, it's easy. We want it all. We want, you know, the lowest carbon energy for the most affordable price without compromising on security whatsoever. But obviously, in the real world, you need to make compromises between those objectives occasionally. I mean, my personal feeling, without, you know, this is an uninformed view, it's a view that has not yet been informed by the detailed work, but as I alluded to earlier, I think when we look at where our carbon comes from, our scope 1 emissions, it's two primary areas. I mean, it traditionally was energy, transport and waste. Waste, we've had that kind of step change. We're still dealing obviously with legacy emissions. But in terms of energy, we've had that big conversation. And again, in terms of transport, that is something where we need to be focused on making it more efficient. We need it to work better for people in the island. We need it to be, primarily low energy where possible, and then energy efficient. We talk a lot in environmental policy about hierarchy. So it's about the priority order that you give things. And it's so easy to sort of focus on the tangible stuff, on the technological solutions, but actually so often you get more bang for your buck if you focus on what's going in the first place, on those highest levels of the hierarchy, which are really about where that demand comes from in the first place. So I think if we can, I think personally we need a quicker step change in terms of transport. And I think space heating is going to be a really key area as well in terms of.
Is there any danger we might miss the targets, do you believe? I mean, improvements, in my experience, come in step changes rather than regular sort of predictable sort of curves and so on. I mean, what do you see as the big wins and so on that can get us to where we need to be? And what do you see as the biggest risks or inhibitors towards achieving that?
Well, I think Alex put it really well earlier. Yes, you're right. There are these step changes, but it is, as we've all been saying, it's a transition, it's a journey, and it's really important that we don't create cliff edges for ourselves. It needs to be a well-managed transition. So if we just said, right, we need to decarbonize by tomorrow, it would be absolute chaos. We need to make sure that we've got the right stepping stones in place to get us from where we are right now to where we want to get to. Of course, there's always a risk that you're not going to make it, but we need, we've committed politically. I think it's also really important that we've committed to setting our net zero targets in legislation. And I think actually one thing we haven't really touched on is the business community, who've got a really vital role to play in this. And I think actually the certainty that we are committed to these targets provides the business community with that surety for their own decisions, their own investments that they need to make for their own transitions. So one of the priorities that we're working on politically, this is climate change, but obviously it's very closely related, is the establishment of an independent advisory panel, because we don't actually have any expert resource in the States at the moment. And I think it's essential, not just from the government's point of view, that we have access to the right kind of expert resource, but also for the island more generally and the business community specifically to be able to tap into that. So that's something I hope that we can get up and running as soon as possible.
Bob, you'd like to add something?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think the whole transition journey, we said 2050, which is 30 years away. 2 years ago, we agreed the energy policy. That's nearly, 10% of the journey already. I'll just say a little bit, one thing I want to say, 46 years ago in September coming, I started work in my first ever power station. It was a chain grade 60 megawatt power plant in the UK. And I walked in as a 16-year-old boy thinking, this is absolutely fantastic. This is the right decision, the right industry to be in. And, I feel that today because I think we're on the brink of a new energy revolution. People are voting by buying their own electric cars, their electric iPhones, their electric scooters, their electric bicycles. Everything is electricity. They're becoming more sustainable. My daughter keeps a spreadsheet of every single journey she goes on, every flight, every journey. She's got her own electric bike. I don't know where she gets it from, but. And so, it's the young people today, the decisions we're making today are affecting young people today, your children, 9, 10 years old, who are going to be running businesses like we are at the end of this journey. And so I think that there's a need for the education syllabus, the schools and colleges, for young people. The gentleman made a great point about building fabrics. You try and get your external wall insulated on your house at the moment. There's just not enough people to do it. You just need the skills and attributes of young people today so you can get your solar panels, so you can get your buildings insulated, so you can reduce your energy costs. I've got a friend, he's only put one black bag out in the last 12 months because he's absolutely recycling everything he can. I know I've got some strange friends, I know, but it just shows you that people are voting with their feet and getting on with this. And that's why the electricity strategy, everything we're talking about today is absolutely crucial by the end of the year to get sorted.
Alex, I think you were itching to say something as well.
Well, very, very similar to Bob, actually. I think, we're talking about, as you were saying, what changes there have been over the last 20 years. Well, actually, I think you know, the big message is it's continual improvement. And when you actually look at what the business community is doing, what individuals, Bob, you've raised, you know, so many customers are you know, making decisions as to how they're improving their energy efficiency, whether you know, policy changes or whether tariffs change or anything else, or maybe because tariffs will change, it's going to be driving this market of energy efficiency and improvement. So I think we need to be looking at how we can engage in the market to make sure that we can be providing those energy products and services. But the other thing, just sort of that message out to businesses, it's really what environmental sustainability is that continuing improvement. It's not, you know, what can you do drastically overnight? It is how can you improve that efficiency? And that is that plan, do, check, act, sustainability, exactly as Lindsay's saying. So, you know, absolutely, events such as this is so important to say, what does the energy transition look like in terms of those big rocks? But really what everybody can be doing in this room is that energy efficiency drive and looking at how they can improve that, and whether it is through, you know, how they're insulating their buildings, you know, whether it's PV, whether it's battery storage, you know, whether it is just energy efficiency products and services, we can all do our part. So I think that sort of there is that change happening, but it's having that data, as you said, to see how much is going through the grid and how much people are maybe moving because of tariff changes to saying how can we you know, become more off grid, but we need that data to help say where you know, what do we need to do as an island to support that.
Alan,
And
were
also
you
that then
catching my eye a
investment.
little earlier?
Yeah, it's just to add really. So I've heard a lot today about we're looking for the sort of magic answer to make this happen. What should we do? Well, I don't want to disappoint you, but there is no silver bullet that's going to solve the energy transition crisis. You know, energy transmission to me sits around the original energy dilemma, which was about how do we make energy secure? How do we make it affordable for all? How do we achieve our environmental aspirations? You know, more recently, we've added in how do we create energy independence for us as a community, as an island? And how do we create some economic stimulus here? Well, there is no one answer. I think what you're hearing is there's lots and lots of different answers that all come together to combine together to actually make the transition successful. And I did hear a quote a couple of years ago that half the technology to actually deliver the energy transition hasn't actually been invented yet. So, you know, what we don't want to do is keep rushing down cul-de-sacs and spending lots of money and not actually achieving anything. I think this is the point about strategically managing the energy transition is one of the most important things for Guernsey, and it needs to remain agile and flexible to allow it to be successful for us as an island.
So wind is here now. Tidal is somewhere further away. Solar is here now. We might be able to get electricity from France through another cable. I mean, what do you see as the sort of most realistic opportunities? I mean, no doubt I've heard some people say, well, tow an ex-nuclear submarine here and park it off in the Russell and it'll give you 200 megawatts of electricity, which would be enough to do all of the channel lines. But realistically, that's not going to happen. But
So the number one question I get asked every single week, why have you not put tidal turbines in the big Russell? Every week almost I get someone asking me that question. Now I think, and more recently, there's a bit of confusion between what I call our aspiration for local renewables for self-consumption, and by that I mean offsetting our current energy use on the island, and a local renewables option for macro scale export to some other jurisdiction to make us lots and lots of money. Now they are fundamentally two different things. The latter, for example, might not even touch Guernsey. It may just go from offshore transformer platform, high voltage DC, straight into a big high voltage grid somewhere else. But I think the electricity strategy needs to understand that, but really it wants to start looking at the sweet spot for our sort of local consumption, local renewables model in terms of what we can do. You know, today it's wind and solar. In the future, it'd be tidal. And I think in terms of that macro export model, I'd wait for tidal. It's a unique selling point for Guernsey. Not everyone's got tidal. Everyone's got wind and sun. You know, in fact, when it's windy and sunny here, it's like to be windy and sunny in most of Northern Europe. So, you know, there's less value there. But I do think it's very, as I say, the electricity strategy's got a very clear, actually, we're looking at this sort of local renewables for local consumption model. I think it can take account of a bigger model, but initially it's got to look at that.
Lindsay, did you want to add something to that?
Yes, it definitely is looking at that, but I would say it hasn't also ruled out that bigger macro scenario that Alan painted. And the other thing that I probably should add is that we're keen to explore as many viable scenarios as possible through the electricity strategy, because I think if there's one thing the Brexit referendum has taught us, is that when you have a not very clearly defined option floating around, then people will interpret that in the way that they you know, think is going to be the optimum, and that might not correlate with reality. So we're quite keen to explore as many credible scenarios, and we are certainly coming at it from a really agnostic perspective. We don't go in with any preconceptions at all. We're really keen to explore the different benefits and opportunities and costs associated with a number of different options. But yeah, I will sort of add to Alan's groan that there was a talk back in, I think, 2008 by someone called Porritt, who came, Jonathan Porritt, thank you. He came over and I think told the Guernsey public that we had the equivalent of 10 nuclear power stations sitting out there in the Russell, if only the states would pull their finger out and stick some Tidal turbines in. And that has haunted us to this day. And actually, until Alan spoke, I thought we were just about getting there with public perception in terms of getting over that hurdle. But now he's told me that he gets that every single week. I'm a bit more despondent about that. It's not quite there yet, but we have been very, very closely monitoring that situation. And also, we haven't been sitting on our hands. We have been furiously collecting as much data about our local renewables resources we possibly can. So we have been active. We just haven't been at the point where we can deliver on that so far.
Bob, so Bob first, and
I'm not sitting on the end next time. I think it's important as well about the market pricing element. We're getting a lot of inquiries from existing customers and new customers who are solar PV or want solar PV with power walls. Actually, they are self-consuming their electricity, but they're now saying they've had enough of all these changes. They want to go off grid. They just want to disconnect, have a small generator just for the winter to top up where they need to. And our view is that we don't want people to go off grid. You know, we agreed that in the energy policy that we're stronger together as an integrated smart grid network. So, you know, there's another option that we, Little Green Energy particularly, can install these solar systems and sell the electricity to people, so that it's actually private investment. And I think there's a very strong appetite for that in the island. So again, it's about reducing the demand, being able to have private investment to do these schemes as well, which I think will play an important role as part of the big jigsaw of the transition.
And Alex, final word on this one?
Yeah, mine was a sort of combination of all of it. It's very much, we're not working in isolation. We need to, as Lindsay's saying, continuously look at what's happening around. Sort of in terms of Tidal, you know, there's the likes of the Tiger project, which is various developers and interested parties throughout the English Channel who are looking at test cases for Tidal, looking at how they can route to market, looking at everything else. And that's happening right now. And they're due to be releasing their results, sort of, I think, at the end of this year. And that's all of our neighbours are working to say what can happen in terms of Tidal. So things are moving. We need to be following and watching what's happening. And the same applies to sort of, you know, looking at hydrogen again. We don't know whether it's a red herring. We don't know whether there's that potential, but we need to look at what's happening in small islands. And you know, what was possible or not possible a year ago is changing next year and changing the next year. And I think if there's one thing which is the biggest mistake that's happened, is people getting complacent, or people making assumptions that, well, we can't do this because the technology hasn't advanced. You know, look at the speed electric vehicles that are sort of coming online. You know, I remember conversations going, oh, it's not going to be till 2030. Oh, and look at where we are, and look at the show of hands. So I think we really need to be not complacent as an island, because whether policy likes it, or whether, you know, the main energy providers like it or not, customer choice is going to drive that change, and it's going to happen a lot faster than I think anybody in this room anticipates.
I think the biggest issue is the day when I get an electric vehicle. We had a chat the other day, Rupert. I've got a 1948 Pushang, and I love riding it around the island. Nobody would want to nick it, but it's just, you know, that's when I make that move, I think that'll be it. I mean, it's something akin to the late in the 1900s, at the early part of the century, when last century, when horsepower was everywhere. Everybody had horses and carts, and then the car came along, the internal combustion engine. What's going to happen to all the horses? You know, everyone was up in arms. And what happened was that horses became a hobby or a private interest, and then the internal combustion engine was primary. I think what's going to happen is that The internal combustion engine will be the thing that you drive at the weekend, your old car, keep it in the garage, and your electric vehicle, which Guernsey is ideal for, will be used all through the week with your bicycle. So that transition is moving all the time.
Let's bring us all back to earth a little bit now and just contextualize this in terms of cost. I mean, we've heard numbers of around 85 million or so for a new cable to France, which in the context of a 40-year lifespan is 2 to 3 million a year or so, which, just to put that in perspective against GEL's annual turnover, which I think is what, 60 odd million or so. Doesn't sound a huge amount. The amount that is being proposed to spend upgrading the network is in the region of 10.5, 11 million or so in the first year. Alan, can you just sort of flesh out a bit of colour on what the successive capex is in the sort of grid network over the next few years? Because it sounds to me as though that's going to be a lot bigger in terms of annual cost than the cost of financing and installing a cable is, albeit it's absolutely a crucial part of our infrastructure.
Just to cover the cable issue first, so everyone keeps saying, you know, do we have to spend the £85 million on further interconnection? But if we don't spend it on further interconnection, we'll spend it on the power station, because most of the power station is really old, it needs to be replaced. So if you want to rely on the power station for security supply, if we don't spend it on a cable, we'll be spending it at the power station. So all that's factored into our planning. I'd say the bit that's going to be really expensive is the development of the grid and the sort of replacement and the upgrading of the grid. We've sort of predicted we may have to do up to 8 kilometres of cabling a year. You know, imagine the roadworks associated with 8 kilometres of cabling every year. It's a lot. And when we do our sort of financial forecasts based on that sort of expenditure, you know, tariffs look ugly. It looks really, really expensive. You know, one of the big things we need to talk about when we talk about electricity strategy is how do we pay for this? And how do we make this journey affordable for everyone that lives here? So I would say, you know, that the £10.7 million capex is very much a baseline capital model. It's about replacing what we've got today. Electricity strategy will start to set out what we want it to look like in terms of customer expectations, technological changes. And from that, we'll look at the pace we need to make that investment and how we can afford it as an island.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Is there a question? Rex? Yeah, how would I forget? Rex Furbrush, ladies and gentlemen.
There is a slightly different approach to take rather than doing up houses, because I've reduced my gas bill this year by 9%. I've reduced the temperature in my house by 5 degrees, and I bought 2 onesies that I used all the winter. And they're both rabbits. They were on sale for £11. I used them all winter with my wife, and there's not one person in this room, I don't believe, would sit in their house in a onesie. So you have to ask, and young people chooses. I've asked the cricketer to develop a new onesie for Guernsey. He's laughing, but it worked. And I didn't have to warm up my house. I reduced it 5 degrees intentionally. And everybody, sorry to say this, should be sitting in a onesie this winter.
Excellent. Well, that's an advertisement for Guernsey Woolens and the Cricketer, I think. So thank you. Lindsay, do you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, Rex, I'm just going to, every time I see a onesie now, I'm going to think of Rex. But it is a serious point. And actually, when the energy-related crisis as a result of the invasion of Ukraine was in its early weeks, the EU did actually put out exactly that message, minus the onesie. But they did ask as basically as a collective war effort, a response to the situation in Ukraine. They did ask customers, householders, to reduce the temperature in their homes. It was actually an easier ask in March or April than it would have been in November. But it is a serious point. And, you know, when I was talking earlier about the sort of boring side of demand management, that's one of them. You know, it really comes back to how much energy do we need to use in the first place? Because the least impactful, the least environmentally impactful unit of energy is the one that we don't use in the first place. So I think it is actually a really important aspect. It is cultural, so it's quite hard. But you know, it is one with potential.
Okay, just changing tack again. In terms of ownership, obviously GEL is a states-owned entity. I was just going to ask the philosophical question if anyone thinks that, does it matter who owns the electricity assets? Does anyone have a view on that at all, or is it, or do we assume that it remains in state's control, or what? I mean, Henry.
Rupert, thank you. The energy infrastructure ownership, the grid, I guess, is one thing. Personally, I can see a time where actually it could make sense for across the Channel Islands, including Sark and Alderney and Jersey, our cousins, having a single Channel Island infrastructure group. But what I'd like to, and this will go to the point before the onesies, which was very fair. I'd like to know about the rollout of the cabling. Is that going to upgrade the whole of the island to be able to service and maintain and power the EVs that are coming and the electric boilers, which we will likely see a continued shift towards? And then are we working with our Jersey cousins to potentially look at how we can harvest wind resource, etc., with them? I know they are looking at renewable wind projects. Are we going to partner with them, or could we partner with them?
I guess the answer is probably yes, but that's also a political question as well. But,
I can answer the political point really quickly before handing over to Alan for the rest of it. The answer is absolutely. We've already had political discussions. I've had a discussion with my counterparts in Jersey, and that is absolutely something we're going to explore.
Alan.
Just to do the last part first. So again, we've spoken to Jersey Electricity about them exploring offshore winds. I would say, it does come with a consequence. You introduce that sort of scale of intermittent generation into our power purchase agreement with France, and it will drive the price of electricity we buy from France up, because they'll have to all of a sudden take on the balancing role, which is what we do currently. So, it's a very positive, but there's also a consequence to doing that. In terms of upgrading the grids, absolutely. The grid needs to be replaced, one, because quite a lot of it's very old. It also needs to be replaced in terms of its capacity to deliver the energy transition. And this comes back to the point about how quickly we want to do it, which is, again, part of electricity strategy. I think we need to manage that very well, so we don't just overinvest and do stuff that we counter to where we might need to end up in 2050. As I mentioned before, a lot of the technology hasn't been invented yet. We need to be very careful, very agile and flexible about how we upgrade the network and also all the substations and other associated bits of plant.
And I'm just about to cut Alan's grass here. I was expecting him to cover it. My understanding, and Alan will correct me if I'm wrong, is that in terms of EV charging, which Henry referenced in his question, the sort of standard charging, the kind that I've got, which is where you plug your car in, that's not an overly burdensome on the grid. My understanding is that the rapid charging, which would be potentially, especially for commercial vehicles, which are probably a little bit behind in terms of that main transition compared to the domestic market, they are more of an issue in terms of their draw on the grid. But also, I think the heating is a much bigger consideration. I think it's of a different order of magnitude. That's my understanding, but I will look to Alan to confirm or correct.
Yeah, so the decarbonisation of transport is less of a concern, because Guernsey, we don't do hundreds and hundreds of miles every day. A small charge overnight will allow you to get and do what you need the next day. And I think when we can make that very intelligent, so you come home from work or come home from school or wherever, and you plug your car in, then leave the responsibility of when that car charges overnight to us, to when there's actually spare capacity on the grid or optimal capacity on the grid. And you may have a contract. We say, I only want it charged by 80% next morning because I've only got to go back to work and back, or actually I'm on the condor the next day, I need it fully charged. But when we come on to fast charging or more frequent charging, in fact, I was just talking to a taxi driver on the way here who said to me, we're looking, how would we decarbonise the taxi fleet? We need some fast charging in the day. And I said, well, look, leaving aside the capacity issue, which we're going to solve with further interconnection or local renewables or storage, it's then making sure there's the appropriate charging points next to our infrastructure, so we don't end up spending lots of money having to run cables to their particular yard. It may be we just need to make a facility, I don't know, 5, 10 points over the island where there's that rapid charge. So another example is we might put some fast chargers down at the ferry port, because you turn up to get on your ferry, I've only got 40%, I've got to do 200 miles when I get there. That's another opportunity to, or a situation where you may need a fast charge. But so decarbonisation of transport, transport not just an issue. Decarbonisation of heat is a bigger issue, but they might be linked together. So Bob talked about energy storage. You know, it may be that actually that energy storage is used to heat your house at the end of the day. It may be also that you drive home from work and the spare capacity in your car isn't to prop up the grid. It's actually to warm your house up based on the cheap electricity you bought the night before. So this is where technology is going to have a role in how we manage that energy transition, particularly the decarbonisation of heat.
Okay.
I would also just add on to that, and I think this is where I think that it's that conversation about that speed of the energy transition, and also the role of alternative energy sources, whether it is existing gas, or whether it is moving to green gases, in terms of saying, right, if we have got those pinch points within that network, what is a more cost-effective way of doing that? Could it be a combined heat and power that also can power superchargers, that can also do heat and electricity? What is there around the grid that we can say, what is the most cost-effective way of actually delivering what we need? Is it totally replacing the network at whatever cost that is applicable for that? You know, what are the costs that need to be factored into not only sort of reinforcing the grid for energy, decentralized energy generation sources, but also in terms of a cable, what would be needed to sort of plug in that second interconnector? What are there other options? And this is where we've got to say, well, what other energy options in terms of gas, in terms of green gases, could we be using to sort of help support that transition in terms of that network? What is right for Guernsey for the amount of money we've got to spend as a small community?
Just on the subject, we've talked very much about Guernsey, implicitly Jersey and so on as well. I was going to ask a sort of slightly broader question, where does sort of Sark and Alderney fit in to the electricity strategy? I mean, clearly they're both arm's length entities in their own right and so on, but what sort of consideration has been given for their requirements sort of longer term?
Well, I think in terms of electricity, I mean, certainly they're not being ignored, but the electricity strategy is has got a Guernsey focus, and I think the most fundamental thing that we need to recognise at this particular point is we're not the three islands, our three islands are not interconnected. So we actually, there's one of our officers who'll probably get embarrassed if I point him out. I can't actually see him, luckily for him, but he is very involved in the development of the electricity strategy, but he also sits on the he is invited along to Alderney's meetings about their electricity strategy, or the work that they're doing and their future options, which they're assessing at the moment. Alderney, Sarka used to sit on the renewable energy team with us as well. So I'd certainly say, if there are any opportunities for efficiencies or synergies, I'm sure, we'd all be really keen to explore that. But I think in terms of electricity, we're not currently interconnected between the three islands. So, we have to look at it with a primarily Guernsey focus.
Thank you. I'm conscious of that we're sort of coming towards the end of our allocated time, and it's my ever intention of getting you out of here by 2 o'clock at the latest. I mean, clearly we've covered a vast range of topics, from sort of capital investment to environmental stuff, to technology, to tariffs, to demand management, and so on. Fundamentally, the decisions we're going to have to make are going to be political, and that scares me in some degree, way, shape or form. I mean, you've only got to have read the newspapers recently to look at the record on, or recent states voting record on things like harbours, secondary pensions, taxation, and
Let's
so on.
get a tunnel.
Tunnel. Do we want to add the electricity strategy to that note? I would absolutely hope not, and so on. But I mean, given the absolute importance of this and so on, how motivated do you believe is the current states to achieve a good result on this and be seen to have done something for the collective good?
I don't frankly care what is seen to be done. I think it comes down to what is actually done. And I think it's my job, primarily my job, to explain to the states who, as you depressingly summarise, has not got a good track record in making decisions this political term, to explain that there is no such thing as a do nothing option in this scenario. Even a can kicking exercise, you know, if the states decided to kick a can down the road, which I very much hope that they wouldn't, I think there is actually, I should say in fairness, I think there is a real appetite to see the electricity strategy and hopefully to make a decision. I mean, I would say, you know, I anticipate we won't all be on the same, singing from the same song sheet. I'm sure there will be a spectrum of different views about what the right options are and how the different components should balance. But there's no such thing as a do nothing option in this scenario, because if we fail to make a decision through the electricity strategy debate, that will have to inform various commercial decisions that need to be made, not least from Guernsey Electricity. And Alan's probably the better person to talk about the implications if no decision is made. But we are absolutely determined to bring the electricity strategy to the states as soon as possible. This year, which realistically will be the end of the year. And it is really my job to stress upon my colleagues that we need to make a decision then and there. You know, we cannot prevaricate on this one.
Well, Alan, can I just ask you to comment on, in terms of the principal deliverables here, in terms of security, resilience, affordability, environmental responsibility, how does the score sheet look to you in terms of where we should be going?
Look, I'm very clear that I do believe...
And what's the implications for not doing?
Guernsey needs very clear government policy direction. I think to make the transition happen for Guernsey, it will need to take certain policy interventions as well to make things happen, because otherwise it won't. I don't think the market alone and technology alone will actually create energy transition. If we don't do that, the implications are I'm going to spend a lot of money on hydrocarbon generation, which is absolutely the wrong thing to do. And we'll spend a lot of money not achieving our decarbonisation targets. So it's quite clear that that direction is absolutely needed now. It needs to be very clear to the whole energy market, not just to Guernsey Electricity. How are we going to do this? And then make sure it happens.
Thank you very much. Before this panel session started, I did just warn each of the four panelists, I was going to ask them to make 3 points in their closing remarks, and they've got about a minute and a half in which to do it. So I'll just ask each of them in turn, starting with Bob.
Thanks for that, Rupert.
You've had some warning.
Okay, first point, inaction is not an option. Electricity strategy needs to be completed and concluded by the end of 2022. I think that is absolutely critical. The second point is that there is unequivocal evidence that climate change is affecting human life on Earth and also the natural world. And we have to get on and do this. And the third point is keep it local. Locally generated renewables and battery storage is the key to the future, and we're ready to deliver.
Alex?
Crikey, that's all my three. Right, okay. Absolutely, in terms of keep it local, in terms of customer choice, in terms of understanding environmental impact locally, as well as in terms of our carbon emissions. And I think that's one of the key things for me as sort of an environmental specialist. There's two arms, so this is my second point. There is two arms to a sustainability tree. One is a global commitment towards carbon reduction, and the other one is understanding environmental impact, and that's environmental impact locally. So if we're asking that question about what is the environmental impact of an energy source, we need to look at local as well as air pollution. And the third one, exactly the same as Bob, change is going to be happening, but we need the right policy structure and regulation to be able to understand how we can operate in it, to attract new market and also to give reassurance to existing players in the market where our guardrails are.
Lindsay.
Well, as the others have stolen my thunder, I'll say my 3 points are demand, supply and market structure, which is the main components, obviously, of the bit of work that we're doing. I completely agree with Bob's first point, which would have been one of mine. There is no do nothing option here. The state absolutely has to put its big boy pants on and step up for this one. And really, I think it all boils down to the three corners of the energy trilemma. I think in particular, we don't like losing things we've already had. We've got a very good level of security. I think it's going to be hard to persuade people to compromise much on that. The environmental imperatives are exactly that. They are imperative. I hope I don't need to persuade anyone in this room of that, but also affordability. You know, we are in a cost of living crisis, and we have been slightly insulated from its worst effects, but I think it's something that we're going to have to be really, really mindful of politically. We do need we need to work with the community, and we need to work with the industry to deliver what's right for the island.
Alan.
I wish I'd gone first. My three are, and I think I've said most of them, is we need to start thinking of the energy transition as a long journey and stop judging ourselves on trying to achieve overnight success with it. It is a longer term journey. Let's get our heads about how we can make that realistic. The second one, and this is I think is a key success criteria for electricity strategy, is it needs to create a collaborative market, not a competitive market. And the reason I say that, if it's all about a race to the bottom in terms of pricing and those sort of things, then it's wrong. We won't achieve what we need to do in terms of a successful outcome for the energy transition. We need to create a market that works collaboratively together, even if it means some of us may be going out of business. You know, we've got to understand that that's a real outcome. And the third one is, whilst we need to understand we want our gigawatt island in terms of creating local renewables, don't miss the fact that actually a self-consumption model is probably more achievable in the short term. I think the other one will happen at the right time. But if we want a desire to have some local renewables, understand what that looks like. What's the sweet spot in terms of local renewables for us as a community?
So, in summary, I hope we've given you some idea of the complexities and nuances of what energy transition actually means in terms of cost, in terms of commitment, in terms of political will, and in terms of willingness of everyone here to get behind whatever strategy is agreed. I've got to thank Peter Barnes here and Sarah over here, who deeply integrated into this entire process and so on, and have the unenviable task of pulling all these threads together into a sort of cohesive document and so on. So I take my hat off to them, and I hope you can come up with the right answers and so on. It's a monumental task, but I'm sure you're both up to it. I've also just realised, actually, I forgot to introduce the panel right at the start. I'd like to thank Bob Beebe from Little Green Energy, Alex Hershel from the Energy Centre, Lindsay de Sausmarez from E&I, and Alan Bates from Guernsey Electricity. So thank you all very much for your participation, and also entering into the spirit of collaboration, which is the basis on which our engagement started with. Exactly. Collaboration and intimacy, I should say, perhaps. So could I just ask you to indulge in a quick round of applause of appreciation for our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, that is a lovely note to end on, because collaboration is absolutely what we're trying to achieve when giving a platform to really critical conversations like this at the Chamber of Commerce and for the best of Guernsey. This is one of 3 panel discussion events that we've been putting on. This is the second of which, and the third is going to be happening on the 20th of June in partnership with our Sustainable Business Initiative, looking at sustainability and production and behaviours on island in terms of food. So if you've enjoyed today's discussion, please do check that out and come along to that as well. A big thank you again to Islands for letting us put on events like this. They're so important. We will be putting out a recording of today's discussion, so please share what you've heard today and keep that conversation going. And then a couple of final dates for your diary. We have our Chamber of Commerce AGM taking place this Thursday at 5 o'clock at the Chamber offices on the 9th of June, and then also a summer party to celebrate and relax with all of our wonderful members taking place on the 16th of June next week. So thank you very much for coming. An enormous thank you to the panel and to Rupert for brilliantly moderating today, and we'll see you all shortly, I'm sure. Thank you.